there's kind of two great crimes in the financial planning space. And one of those is not saving enough money, right? Just, living in, too much debt and, just not saving enough money. And like, how am I going to be financially independent someday in the future? But the other side of that, I think, is also as important to focus on, which is having too much money.
Lube your chain and pump up those tires. It's time for Aging on Dirt, where we defy expectations one pedal stroke at a time. We age, but we don't have to get old, and we all want to experience the joy of mountain biking as long as possible. Are you starting to ride at an unreasonable age, getting back into it after a long layoff, or just wanting to extend how long you'll be riding? Then you're in the right place. And now, your host, Joel Zeeve.
Absolutely cannot miss a second of this show. Today's guests are two of the three hosts of the podcast called The Stacking Benjamin Show, also known as the greatest money show on earth, Josh Bannerman and Doug Pfaff. The Stacking Benjamin Show was named 2023's best personal finance podcast by Bankrate.com. That gives you an idea what you're in for here. And if you're thinking, Joel, your show is about aging mountain bike riders, not money. Well, you probably haven't been riding very long because riding mountain bikes is very much about money. You're going to learn so much from listening in on this conversation. We covered in part how to plan your mountain biking into your budget now and to make sure you've got enough money to continue to do it well into your retirement years. We talked about a whole lot that really surprised me, and I consider myself fairly money savvy. If you're a fan of the Stacking Benjamin Show, you know that Josh is otherwise known as OG and Doug as Joe's mom's neighbor Doug. If you're not a fan of the show, well, you should be. Let's start stacking up some Benjamins as we age on dirt. And if you're curious about the inside joke and the banter right at the beginning with my initial intro here, you really need to check out their podcast for it to make sense. Just having a little fun with Doug at the start. Let's welcome neighbor Doug and OG.
That was pretty good.
Was that acceptable?
It's a good effort.
For a first attempt.
Effort.
If he's in the hospital and you need a substitute, give me a call.
I don't think you're making the
really
team with that. Let's not get carried away.
You got vacation? Do you guys take time off from your podcast?
We finally get Doug on a bike and he falls off and he can't do the show anymore.
Yeah. That could, especially if it's a mountain bike. That could happen.
Yeah, it could be
because I'm not going to be sober on the bike, so there's a high likelihood I'm falling off.
So like with all of my listeners, I like to start off and ask, so we can get to know you just a little bit from a biking background. What's your age, where you're from, and where do you like to ride?
Where do I go?
We can start with either one of them.
Yeah, I am 46 and, working on 34. So I kind of feel like I'm going backwards. Mm-hmm. And no, honestly, I do think that from an exercise standpoint, that's how I feel. I've always kind of wanted to get into cycling. So I do road cycling and I always thought I would be good at this. We were early adopters at Peloton, the indoor training thing. Many years ago. And so last summer, I said, you know what, I'm going to do this. But I made a commitment to myself. I said, I have to ride a significant amount for 6 weeks on the one that's hanging in the garage, like the Schwinn, whatever. And and I filled the tires up and I went out in the hot sun. I live in Dallas. And after a month and a half, I was like, all right, see, I committed to it. I like it. I enjoy it. Now I'll go shopping. And I was ill prepared for what came next when you walk into the bike shop and go, I'll just take whatever you think is best, sir. It's like, right this way. Oh, do you have an American Express card? Well, of course.
A black one.
Yes. Sadly, no. But so I got a road bike and I don't do a ton, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, maybe I'll probably get like 80, somewhere between 80 and 100 miles a week, generally speaking.
How about you, neighbor Doug?
I think the last time I put my butt on a bike seat was 2020. during COVID. A buddy of mine and I went fly fishing, and the river was blown out. We had nothing to do, so we hopped on his fat tire bikes on concrete, and it felt like the whole damn thing was uphill. I'm like, this is why I don't ride bikes anymore. It was ridiculous. I was like cinder blocks attached to the axles, and I did not enjoy that experience that much, and haven't biked as much as I should.
You're in northern Michigan, so you've got, you can take that fat tire bike and go find some groomed trails on the snow, and that's a ton of fun, but it's still 90% of the time you're pedaling, even downhill.
Yeah, no, it was rough.
Sweet. So when I originally had reached out to you two, I had one initial thought, which was to have you discuss thinking about discretionary income. And one of the benefits of being an aging rider, like all of my listeners, is that in my mind that we generally, a lot of us have discretionary income. And I wanted to get your thoughts on when it's okay to be using that on a relatively expensive sport like mountain biking. And so I figured we'd start with that.
Discretionary income, fun place to spend money. I think I have a couple of hobbies personally that, and sadly, none of them are inexpensive. They all seem to have pretty high costs associated. I mean, just something as simple as golf, right? You go play golf a reasonable amount of time. Doug plays golf, I know that. And, you go get a set of golf clubs or a flipping sleeve of golf balls, I mean, you get a pack of Titleist is $50 or $60 now, probably, I guess. I don't even, So I think at some level you can kind of compare it to other things. And, when it comes to spending money, ultimately, you're going to have some priorities there. Certainly I would think that if you're, looking at it from a health standpoint, if you're looking at it from, all of the physical benefits and all the benefits associated with longevity, not just the health, heart rate benefits and all that sort of stuff, but also camaraderie and, friendship and all those other sorts of things that are super important as you get old, like Doug. It's like, there's got to be some sort of
it was coming.
There it is. There's got to be some sort of discretion around like being okay with it. And I think, as I see people when it comes to, from a financial planning standpoint, looking at spending or saving and those sorts of things, I really feel like there's kind of two great crimes, in the financial planning space. And one of those, which gets all the press, is not saving enough money, right? Just, living in, too much debt and, just not saving enough money. And like, how am I going to be financially independent someday in the future? But the other side of that, I think, is also as important to focus on, which is having too much money. And that sounds like really sacrilegious to some people, and certainly to have a planner say like, what do you mean I have too much money? But if you've done all of your projections and you're on track for your financial goals and you have an opportunity to spend money on something that you enjoy, whether it's cycling or health related, or taking the family on a trip to Disney or something like that, why wouldn't you do those things and enjoy the resources and enjoy the discipline that you've used your whole life to get to? And that's a big stress for a lot of people, especially people who are going to spend, $3 or $5 or, I've seen, obviously you've seen these too, $10,000, $15,000 on bikes or equipment and, races and all this other sort of stuff. You can invest all sorts of money. If you wanted to.
And it's not just the bike. It's the clothing, it's the tools, it's the maintenance, it's the it's the education, the coaching, and it's everything.
Well, and it's the time away, right? You're investing money and you're also investing time. So you have to be aware of that. But I think if you're in the position where from a financial standpoint, you're being successful or you are successful with your money, carving out a piece of that for something that's enjoyable, it's totally doable.
Okay. Yeah. So how do we know when we're there, when it's okay to start using discretionary income on things like that?
Well, ultimately having some confidence around, where you're headed financially, is really the biggest piece, right? If you're 50 years old and you're like, okay, I should probably buckle down and start saving money in my 401k for the first time. you may not be at the spot where it also makes sense to spend $8,000 on a, annually on a hobby like cycling. But by the same token, if you've been saving for a while, or you're back to that, you're that 50-year-old that's going, okay, I finally, the kids are out of school or college is paid for or whatever. And now I can finally, I'm at peak earning years. I think the key is to do the math and do the calculation and see what the trade-off is. When you're saving or you're investing, all you're doing is you're trading today for tomorrow, right? That's the transaction that's happening. You're saying, I'm going to put 20 grand in my retirement account this year so that I don't have to work when I'm 68. And so if you look at that and say, well, I'm going to put 10 grand in my retirement account this year and I'm okay with working until I'm 70. That's a decision that you can make. There's no right answer for that for any one person. The person who wants to be financially independent and retire when they're 55 may look at that as being very silly. And then there's another person who's an entrepreneur who's like, I love what I do. I could work when I'm 65 or 70 or 75 or 80. My grandfather worked until he was 93. He owned a business.
Wow.
And yeah, he wasn't, laying shingles, but he went to the office. He had a big sign on the door that said chairman of the board, and most of the time he was just sleeping, but he had purpose. He had a reason to go there. So I think a lot of it is knowing where you are, figuring out where you want to go, and then deciding, what you're going to do with that information. Far too many people in the money space just like do stuff. Well, I don't know. I read online to put money in my 401k, so I did that. I read online that I should have a 529 for my kids, so I picked a number and did that. It was just these kind of rules of thumb, or just we read it on the internet or on a podcast. The guy said to do this. Financial planning is uniquely personal, and what's important to you, what's important to Doug, or what's important to me may be all different. That doesn't make your, Doug's, or my plan better or worse than anyone else's. It's really what's good for our family and good for what we're working on right now.
The point of all of that is you do have to sit down for 20 minutes, an hour, however long it takes you to figure out where do you want to be. We talk about this all the time. I think the only wrong answer in all of this is you just live your life with absolutely zero expectation of, do I want to work till 93 or 53? But other than that, to OG's point, pick a goal and work your way into that. And so you asked, Joel, how do you know, or how do our listeners know when they're there? Well, you got to define what there is first.
Makes sense.
And then, and then you can figure out, okay, I need to save X amount and I'm going to pull automatically. We talk about automating your goals all the time so that you don't have to think about it and make sure that, I got to write that check to this account every month. You're going to mess up on that pretty quickly. It's like being on a diet. But if you can automate that, and it'll help you get to the goal when you're 60 or whatever that you've defined, and that's happening, you can figure out what your discretionary income is every month, every quarter, every year. Go have fun with that and do things that make you mentally healthy. I did that with my sons. I did a really rudimentary budget. I mean, like laughably rudimentary by a lot of people who are hardcore and into this community of personal finance. But I had to really
start somewhere.
Yeah. And I had to really encourage them. Like okay, here's your gross income, here's your net income, here's your utilities, really basic stuff. Mm-hmm. And if you're putting 20% away or whatever at this age, because they're still in their 20s, you're putting X amount away into your 401k and then X amount separately on top of that into a Roth or, whatever was right for them. The rest of it, you really need to go have fun with, whether that's traveling for you or that's a, sport, any kind of recreation. But I just, as a father, really coached them to have that mental satisfaction of a hobby, of a release, so that they didn't feel like they were just hitting the grindstone every day and there was nothing to look forward to. And they didn't have to feel like, I can't do any of that until I've got $7 million in the bank. I wanted them to feel like I'm on track, back to your point of when do you know you're there? Well, they have a plan and they've got the structure in place to know that as long as they keep saving that amount every month, the rest of it is go have fun. And that eventually you're going to get married. Eventually you're going to want to buy a house. It's cool, man. You're on track to do all of those things, and you can still go skiing and you can still go on a golf vacation. And I think that's really important.
So it's okay to spend it if you've got it. And I guess what I see a lot is people that are that don't have a plan and are more reacting. Because I mean, let's face it, the mountain bike industry is like almost every other industry that's out there. It's got marketing, and that marketing is designed to get us to want to believe that we've got to have that next best thing. And to make things worse, like OG said, it's very social. So hanging out with people who, so they build this this fear of FOMO that, well, I've got to have this because, you know, I ride with these 10 guys and they bought the next best thing within the last 6 months. So I've got to do the same thing. So I guess if we go down that line, how do we fight that urge to stay within the budget once we have it, and get away from, you know, all these urges that are out there that are leading us toward wanting to go beyond the budget?
You know, I think that, you know, unless you're so insanely wealthy that you don't need to really care about what you spend, you have to figure out what's the priority. There's basically two different paths in how to think about budgeting and cash flow in your personal life. And one side is to say, I'm going to take how much money I make and I'm going to keep track of every dollar I spend. You know, I'll go out to eat or go to the grocery store, or I order something from Amazon, you know, and and then I've got, you know, I'm gonna keep track of that. I've got my savings, I'm gonna keep track of my healthcare expenses, and then I've got leftover money that's not allocated to anything, right? And that's my fun money, maybe.
Okay.
The other way to think about it is, I think, far less intensive, and starts with, you know, what am I trying to get to? Like Doug was talking about, what's the goal? What's important to me in terms of financial independence, and where does that look like, where I want it to happen? And how much does it cost for me to have that financial independence? And then say, okay, out of my income, I need to save X dollars to get there. And you may calculate that. There's resources online. You can hire people to do it. You know, you can do it yourself. You may calculate that number and go, well, that's a number that's a little higher than I've got. You know, I can't do all these things. Well, it's about progress, right? Not getting all of this stuff done day one. Like Doug was talking about with his kids, it's not like you're going to say, hey, you just graduated college. All right, you have to max up your, you know, his and hers 401k, his and her Roth. You got to do HSAs. You might as well fund 529s, $400 a kid. You know, probably have 3 kids, so that's $1,200. It's like you don't have the money for that. You know, right. You might have the money for that when you're 50 and you're, you know, been in your career for 30 years and you're kind of more peak earning years for sure. So you want to move toward that. Well, my point is that start with the savings that you have, and then everything else is fair game. And so you just make the choice. If you want to buy the expensive thing and you want to refresh that all the time, there's plenty of people out there who are, you know, car guys or car gals, right? And they go, well, every 3 years I get a new car. And there's a lot of people who go, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Right. And then there's a lot of people who go, that's awesome. I can't believe you've got the new whatever. Right. It's just, you know, and so this is your thing. If your thing is to say, no, every couple of years, I'm going to get the newest bike, or maybe not every 6 months. That would be maybe. I mean, the Trek guy would love it. You would probably get invited to a Christmas party or something. The
seat won't even form to your butt in that amount of time.
Doug's never been on one of those seats before. They don't form to anything. I think it's your butt forms to the seat, brother. It's not like those big cushy banana seats that you used to have when you were.
Then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's just priorities, right? And, you know, unless you're insanely wealthy and you can literally do whatever you want, you're making those decisions anyway, right? I mean, when you go to the grocery store and you're like, I need butter, you're just subconscious. You're not consciously going, well, do I want the Land O'Lakes butter or do I want the butter from the, you know, you're just going, I need butter, right? And you go, one's $1.50 and one's $3.50. I'll probably take the $1.50 stuff, you know? And so you just have to make those choices more overtly when it comes to, you know, bigger, higher end tickets. So it's like, well, I'm going to do this instead of, you know, going on, you know, a cruise this summer, right? Like, that's fine. Like, that's an affirmative choice that you're making. Doesn't make your choice good and my choice bad. I think where people get in trouble is they don't do any of that thinking. They just sit down and go, I want. And then show up down the line and go, I don't understand. How come I don't have any money? Or how come I've got $15,000 in credit card debt? You know, and I'm paying all this interest. Like, what happened? It's like, well, you just weren't intentional.
Into it.
Yeah, you just YOLO'd, which is, I mean, you can do to some extent, but then there's, the other end of the stick here that you get by doing that. So just be intentional on your spending. If you can wrap up how much I need to save to reach my goals, then everything else is fair game. In order to afford a bike, I can't go out to eat as much. Boom, done.
Well,
that's a choice.
And that's actually kind of a double whammy, because if you want the bike and you choose not to go out to eat as much, then you're probably going to get into better shape faster.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I have 3 major hobbies, all of which, they feel expensive. Whatever your level is of spending, it's going to feel expensive to you more than likely. And it's downhill skiing, it's photography, and it's golf. And you can spend as much money as you want in any of those. But skiing is really my go-to. I've been skiing since I was 2.5 years old. It is where I feel the most comfortable on the planet. I'm sure you have a lot of listeners who have that feeling on a bike, regardless of what environment they're in, whether they're in the city or they're in Moab. You have, in some cases, spiritual moments on a bike, right? Where you are locked in, and whether it's on just that moment on a curve, on a turn when you're ripping it, or you're just in that runner's high when you're just pumping uphill, whatever it is. I'm not a biker. You can tell I'm making this up.
I was going to say you sounded like you've prepared for not being a biker, because that's being in the flow of things is a pretty accurate description the way you just described it.
And I think that's why we have these hobbies, is because we find those things that make us feel like we're in the flow. And for me, that's skiing more than anything else. Yeah, I've pured a 6-iron once in a while. Happens to me about 4 times this summer. Just had a 7-iron moment actually the other day. It doesn't happen all that often. But with skiing, for me, it can happen nearly every turn. I'm hard into carving. Like, carving is my thing. I'm not a bumps guy. I don't have opportunity to ski a lot of powder. But put me on corduroy and I can lay them up on edge, and it's an amazing feeling. And my point is not to dive into that, but to say, like you asked, when should we spend more on a new bike? And should we chase the trends? So as focused as I am on that feeling, I probably buy skis every 10 years. If you watch the marketing, every year it comes out, they're gonna try to convince you're that much closer to being one with the universe on their new skis. And I was able to last about 10 years on each pair. And I raced. I mean, I was skiing, probably 70 days a year, 80 days a year. That's a lot for the Midwest. I was hardcore into skiing, and I somehow managed to feel what I needed to feel, get the satisfaction I needed to get out of the sport with pretty old technology. And man, then when you do bump up, like I did about 3 years ago, it takes you to a whole nother level, and it's really satisfying. But I was able to say, am I still enjoying this sport on these 8-year-old boards, getting that feeling of spirituality, that flow that I needed to have? Yeah, I don't need to spend any more money because I'm still getting the satisfaction. And that was how I justified sticking on to my old boards, even though this was my thing. Like, it's all I care about. I could have justified spending a lot almost every other year if I wanted to, but I just thought, am I getting that satisfaction that I need out of it to keep me coming back? And I was.
Sure.
So that's how I save money by not buying new boards every year, new boots.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, for me, for my bikes, I if I feel the urge, I'll wash it because then it looks a lot newer, and then I'll splurge and get a new piece of bling for it. But that does it for me, and same with cars too. Every spring and sometimes in the fall, just get it detailed, and it's like having a brand new car. Mm-hmm. Like there's $200 instead of $20,000.
Wow, you can get a detail for $200. I'm coming to Utah.
I'm in Utah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Do it in my driveway. I had a surprising number of people, 3 or 4 people said, hey, ask them about planning for health insurance in retirement because of all the crashes that we're going to have on our to bikes as we get older. And I'm like, really? And I wasn't even going to ask.
They're not even remotely considering avoiding the pain or the injuries. They're like, oh, hell no.
Let's assume I wreck 4 times a year. What's that going to do to my insurance cost?
What are your thoughts on simply avoiding getting seriously injured?
Joel, we've spent a lot of time so far talking about where to spend your money, and we've spent a lot of time talking about should you upgrade your equipment. One of the things we talk a lot about on Stacking Benjamins is having the right team in your corner, and we often talk about having a money coach in your corner, and in a lot of cases, that's a great financial advisor. OG, how do you feel about coaching in this recreation world? Like, is that still applicable?
Well, I think that anytime that you can have professional counseling around the thing that you want to get better at, you're going to see some immediate results. I mentioned I have a couple of different hobbies, all of which cost a lot of money. And one of them is a side project that I do on weekends during the fall. And I have coaches for that particular task also because I want to be better at it. If you don't have a coach in every area of your life, it's such an easy upgrade to do. We talked a little bit about all these different upgrades. Like just having the doing the right stuff along the way. I mean, what did I do last year? I just literally went out and rode my bike, no rhyme or reason to it whatsoever. And then it's and then I find out that there's, coaching on bikes, and you should do this training program, and you do these things and you'll get faster and you'll be more successful. And weird how that works, huh? So I think, Joel, you do a little bit of that.
I do, yes. Yeah. And we talked about healthcare and being safe and the costs of potential healthcare from accidents. And I think the best way is just don't crash.
Don't crash.
So,
yeah.
And you can keep people from crashing with your coaching?
You would be surprised the number of habits that people have on mountain bikes that are causing their crashes and they don't know it. And I know that because when I started, it took me 3 years and multiple crashes to figure out that, hey, I really need to figure out why I'm crashing. Much like everything in life, you don't know what you don't know. And once you learn it, then, it's tough to go back.
Don't crash. That's the easiest solution.
OG, let's get back to the health insurance question.
On the financial, independent side or on the retirement side of things, when it comes to healthcare, it's a really big expense. And surprisingly, the vast majority of healthcare costs, maybe unsurprisingly, is at the end of your life, right? That's where the vast majority of your healthcare costs go. Fidelity estimates that number, if you're 65, you should earmark, this is crazy, you need to earmark $300,000 of your retirement account specifically for healthcare costs in the future. So it's so you get to retirement, you're 65, you're like, okay, here, I got the gold watch, I got the new bike, I'm ready to hit the trails and never look back. And then you go, well, wait a second, I got to take out of my account, I got to mentally take $300,000 and set that aside and go, this is my healthcare budget. It changes the numbers quite a bit if you kind of think of it that way.
Oh yeah.
So if you're younger and you're working toward that, I think, obviously planning for the fact that there's going to be some significant out-of-pocket costs. Medicare clearly takes the brunt of that at 65, but it's largely contingent on what your income is. If you are, you're living on Social Security and that's your only form of income and no real assets, your Medicare premiums are nice and low. If you make a bunch of money, you have lots of IRA assets and you've got pension income, you've got other sources of income and you're doing pretty well in retirement, your Medicare premiums are much higher. Makes sense, right? That's how they take care of it. Where most people have a question is, well, what if I want to retire when I'm 57? Medicare doesn't kick in until 65. My company plan has said, see you later. Thanks for leaving, because
you're gone
out of the employee pool. The older guys are the ones that use all the money anyway, so we're happy that it's full of young people now. So there's two things to do there. Firstly is from whatever age you have until 65 for your primary insurance, you can look at that as either COBRA, so your company can extend, if you have a company policy, if you have a group policy, you can continue that policy for at least 2 years, but you're on the hook for all the premiums. So when you look at your paycheck stub and you go, oh, well, that's not bad. I'm only paying $500 a month. Well, no. You're paying $500. The company's paying $2,500. So it's a very expensive proposition, but it's virtually guaranteed coverage. With the ACA plans that are out there now, and every state's going to be different in how they administer those and the availability and locality, you got to put your zip code in. But it would be a good exercise, let's say you're 2, 3, 4 years prior to kind of hanging it up. Maybe you look at what the ACA plans look like in your area based on your income and based on the benefits that you want to have. So you go to healthcare.gov and you put in your zip code, and it will tell you, here's the plans that we have available for that zip code and the requisite cost. So I say that most people now, because of the Affordable Care Act, most people transition from their workplace plan to an ACA plan to Medicare. That's kind of the transition that happens. Okay. And ACA plans are also contingent on income. And so there's some gaming that you can do there in terms of, if you can time your income out, or you can have high investments or non-retirement assets, I should say, that you can live on that don't drive income to your tax return. There's some planning that you could do in there to kind of keep that premium low or as low as possible. Sure. If you're married or you have a spouse, that's another option too, is you might have an option to switch. It's like if you have a partnership where one person is providing the healthcare coverage, you might be able to pick up the healthcare coverage on the, on the other person instead of yours, so that's a fourth option, but not an inexpensive proposition, that's for sure. And I think from a planning standpoint, you definitely you don't want to go into retirement and go like, okay, cool, I've got this covered, and then find out that your healthcare bill is $2,000 a month, for the next 10 years. That's a big number.
That's a big surprise if you're not ready for it.
Yeah. Hey, OG, are there any major medical things like separate, like maybe they don't want to continue with Cobra because it's too expensive, but they just want to have some type of coverage that, covers them if they get paralyzed because didn't see that cliff coming? Like, is there anything like that that they can think about for just those extreme moments besides full coverage like that you would get on ACA or Cobra?
Yeah, they really don't exist anymore because of the marketplace plans. I mean, there's on occasion some here and there. And again, it's going to be really regional and location dependent. But the big catastrophic, you're talking about a catastrophic thing, like, what if I have cancer, or what if I have, I need a heart transplant or something like that? I mean, just straight up the cost of care for any sort of illness or injury is so profoundly high nowadays that I don't know why you would risk out of pocketing any of that. I mean, my son, he was 16, he broke his collarbone in a football game, high school football game, broke his collarbone. All in cost $45,000 to do surgery on a 16-year-old healthy male. It was an hour surgery to plate it back together.
So you passed on that. You just did it yourself at home, right? That's where we're headed with this story.
Bite on this stick, son.
I've got screws.
It's gonna be a little. If you knew how I do with blood, you would know that there is zero chance that I would. That's not my thing. So I feel and we were outsourcing that. So I mean, you think about type of injuries you might have, a cycling accident of some kind. It's not generally going to be like. And then I went to the ER because I had a couple of bruises. Probably it's like the bone was sticking out of my leg. I have a compound fracture. I don't know that you want to be like nickel and diamond that, honestly, if that's your, arguing with that insurance people. Is this catastrophic enough? What if I rip the bone out? Now is it catastrophic? Joel,
I'd like to move on to other listener questions because you've caused OG to say the word wrong so many times I can't listen to him say insurance anymore. It drives me crazy on the show. People who listen to Stacking Benjamins know he says so many words wrong that drive me up the wall, and insurance is probably top of the list. So let's move on to the next question.
Is that from being in the Dallas area, or where does that emphasis come from?
I believe it is the correct pronunciation.
That's his story, and he's sticking to it. I have one point that I wanted to make and see if you guys wanted to comment on it, especially OG since he bikes. What I found is there's a point with bikes of drastically diminishing returns. So like on a mountain bike, your first $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 that you spend, there's a major difference between like a $500 Walmart bike and a $3,500, branded mountain bike. As far as the components, the geometry, how long it's going to last, all of that stuff. And then as you move up from that $3,000-$4,000 point up to the, like you said, OG, you could spend $9,000, $10,000, $12,000. You get smaller and smaller incremental changes that's actually going to affect the joy that you're going to have on the bike.
I think that when it comes to, I think your observation there about like material changes, like literal material changes. I rode the Schwinn mountain bike on the trail, like on our road trails for a month and a half. And then I was like, all right, cool, I got it. And then the guy's like, check out this carbon fiber one. And he like grabbed it and picked it up and gave it to me with one hand. I was like, he's strong. And then I did it myself and I was like, he's not strong. This thing's like light as a feather. You know, it's 23-pound Schwinn bike versus a 7.5-pound, you know, Trek carbon fiber bike. I'm like, holy crap, that is profoundly different. You know, I think you have to solve for what are you trying to do? You know, if you're trying to compete, if you're trying to where it really matters for, you know, for that extra half a second, right? I noticed in the Olympics this past season, it seemed like all the runners had very similar shoes. I don't know if anybody else noticed that. They all had orange Nikes on. Every country, I mean, it seemed like it. There was obviously some variations there, but the countries that were sponsored by Nike all had the same shoes. And I'm guessing that somewhere in there, somebody went, these are the best shoes in the world. And this matters to me because it's the difference between getting a medal or finishing fourth. This point, whatever second, you know?
Well, you saw some of those photo finishes on the bikes. It was just millimeters apart. It's just crazy how close some of those were.
So if you're at that level, right? Then yeah, it makes sense. Like if I get this, if I shave this point, whatever ounce off of here, or this is a smoother transition and I can make this gear change that much faster. And therefore, yeah, okay, it makes sense. But at some point in time, you got to go, well, I'm just doing it, you know, to keep up with the Joneses. I really like your idea about buying different swag because from a tech standpoint, you know, that actually probably provides more benefit to a recreational rider. It's like, well, being able to get that data and saying, okay, I can see where I can improve, or I can see, you know, from a health related standpoint, here's my output versus my heart rate. And now I can take that and change that into like, how do I get better here? You know, that's going to provide a better outcome for you personally than a piece of a bike that, is that much smooth, you know what I mean? Like what are you solving for here? Basically, is kind of my thinking on it, and I'm doing it primarily for health benefits. For me, like I'm competing against myself, right? I'm competing against like I'm trying to have, you know, better output for, you know, per usage of energy, heart rate related, you know, zone 2, zone 4 type stuff. Like trying to figure out like how I can get better VO2 max numbers. Like that's what I'm focused on. And I'm not going to, that doesn't matter if I'm pedaling a Schwinn bike or a carbon fiber street bike. It's still, you know, my output. So I would rather spend on that and have a great, you know, safety feature or a great bike computer or something like that. Personally, I guess.
On the budget part of things, because, and both of you have touched on this quite a bit about the mental and physical health benefits of riding can be tremendous. It's a potential trade-off between spending the money now and the retirement may get pushed out, but my health span and my lifespan potentially are extended the future, and also the benefits right now of riding.
This is an investment, not an expense. This is 100% an investment. And I believe that. I mean, again, back to like do you need to justify that to yourself to go from a $3,500 bike to a $5,500 bike? Maybe not. But if spending $1,000 or $2,500 or whatever, if that gets you off your bottom so that you can go do these things and improve your health, I do think that is a, even if you need the cover fire for it with your significant other or something like that, I think it's totally legitimate, especially if you're tracking or solving for that. And that's the big thing. I know, Doug, you're kind of shaking your head here, but if you're monitoring those things, if you're saying, I know, for example, that my VO2 max number is this, I know it's below average, therefore I needed to get it to that, and that will improve my quality of living. I will lose weight doing this or whatever. And you do those things and demonstrate that it's happening. Of course it has benefits to you in the long run.
Yeah. I mean, you stop my head from shaking right at the end there when you say, and you do those things. Because you can look, it's BS. We all lie to ourselves. Like you can logic your way into spending money all you want.
Sure.
And you can justify, it's the health benefits, honey. I'm going to be so much better at work because I'm riding. Okay. Yeah. But get out there and freaking ride. But if you're going to spend the money and then not actually follow up, and whether it's actually, improve some metric in your health or the mental side of it by doing it, then you got to dig deep and be honest with yourself. Am I really going to go out and get these benefits?
Treadmill, right? That you bought and it's now a clothes hanger sitting in your
Perfect
bedroom or something like that.
Perfect example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing. Like, I think if you're starting out, trying to figure out where you are and trying to figure out where you want to go, obviously is going to help guide this decision. But I don't know of a better way to do it than what I did, which was I need to prove to myself that I deserve this. Like I have it in my mind, and Doug knows me. I'm a ready, fire, aim type of guy. So I'm not like I'm going to think, I'm like, cycling, I'm in. Let's go do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I hit pause for a minute and I said, okay, now I need to do this for a period of time. I didn't have an end goal, but it ended up being about 6 weeks where I said, I need to do this several times a week for the next 6 weeks to see if I really like it. Mm-hmm. And once I was like, okay, this is totally what I would enjoy doing for cardio every day or several times a week, that in my mind was like, all right, cool. Now I can justify the initial spend.
The difference is I don't want your listeners to think, oh, I'm like Josh. I'm a ready, fire, aim person too. Because the difference with him is he has this bizarre ability to stick with the thing he says he's doing. Most of us don't. And I believe you when you say, I'm going to get a bike and I'm going to just dive in and I'm actually going to do it. The vast majority of people don't do that. So don't convince yourself it's okay to spend $7,000 on the next upgrade on your bike because, I'm a ready, fire, aim person too. You got to really be honest with yourself before you stray from your retirement goals first and on something that's discretionary.
When I started, I was 60 pounds heavier. Actually lost about half of that on my own before I got on a bike because I didn't want to kill myself on the bike because I couldn't move on it. And I bought a used bike, super cheap, 3, 4, 5 weeks into it, and said, "This is a blast." Before I went out and spent $3,000 on the first new one, and I had one of my friends who's extremely overweight said, "How much did you spend on that bike?" And I told him, and he was like, "You have got to be kidding me." He could not believe I would spend 4 figures, $3,000, and he was just mind blown. But it's totally changed my health perspective, and it's added years and years onto my life.
And that's the key thing. It's like any hobby, right? It's like, you can go get, to Doug's point, the latest and greatest skis. Maybe you go faster. Maybe you carve a little bit more. Maybe you look cooler. Okay, cool.
Definitely
what does that
cooler.
do for you? Nothing. What if you go play golf and you're like, my golf clubs are 2 years old. Doug got a new wedge for the first time in 72 years. And you're like, hey, these golf balls stop on the green when I hit them now. And I'm like, well, that's what I've been telling you for 10 years. Your wedges have to get replaced every so often. It has some usefulness to spend $150 on a new wedge every couple of years, right? That's a difference than like going to buy a whole new set. You accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, which is lower scores with a $150 purchase, not a $1,500 purchase. You might get lower scores with a $1,500 purchase too, maybe. But hitting it closer, you won't. That's for sure. But yeah, I like Doug's point. You can justify anything to yourself when it comes to money. But if you're tracking it and you're seeing the improvements, look, tomorrow's not promised to everybody. We all learned that, in the last 4 years. It's random, and some days you're here and some days you might not be, right? It just crazy stuff happens. And so you got to have some sort of enjoyment in your life and fun as well. It can't all just be work and saving. Well, you have to be smart with it. The vast majority of us, especially, you think about the longevity that you added to your life, right? It's like the vast majority of people who are doing this are going to live to be we're not average. You're not going to die when you're 81. You're going to die when you're 97 or something. And so if you're like, well, I'll just be average and die when I'm 80. But in the meantime, I'm going to cycle 100 miles a week. It's like, well, guess what? You're going to live to be 100. You know what I mean? Like, because you're doing those things. So you have to be aware of that. That's the benefit, but there's also a cost to that.
Tell us a little bit about your podcast. I've been listening now for a couple months. You guys are doing 3 a week, which is just mind blowing to me. But I usually catch, I'm averaging probably 2 a week that I get in, and really enjoying it. Super entertaining. Give us a little info about your podcast and what we can expect for anybody that wants to join in and listen.
Yeah, our podcast is Stacking Benjamins. We've been podcasting for 14 years, I think is the number, or 13 years, something like that, somewhere in the 1,500 to 1,600 range of episodes at this point. We do 3 shows a week, and kind of the same format. We usually have a guest. We cover some contemporaneous headline, give an opportunity for people to call in and ask some questions. So there's lots of learning that goes on. We try to keep it pretty light and make sure that people have fun along the way. You know, no yelling at you about your money. We're all kind of learning as we go, even those of us that have been doing this a long time. So
I think
try to have fun.
I think Josh is underselling it. First of all, we should also point out we have a third person who's kind of the ringleader of the whole thing. Like Josh and I just show up to be entertaining. I'm purely there only for entertainment value. Josh is kind of the real subject matter expert. We got an amazing guy named Joe who really does most of the work behind the scenes. 97% of it behind the scenes, to be able to produce 3 shows a week, to find the guests, to get the calls from the listeners, and he does all the prep. We often talk about our show is, it's the only time you're going to have fun talking about personal finances. We do everything can to may have a lot of laughs. And secondly, we kind of structure ourselves a little bit like a late night show, like a Tonight Show or something like that, where you've got a main host and there's segments. So if you don't love something we're talking about, the headline we're talking about or what the guest is, just fast forward 15 minutes and you'll get to the next thing. So you don't have to, we're like roughly an hour long, but if you don't love that thing we're talking about, don't turn us off. Just hit the fast forward button for 15 minutes. Stop at the advertisers, please listen to those, but then move on to the segment. And there's a really good chance you're going to like whatever the next segment is. So, if you've been scared to talk about money because it sucks, right? It's a stressful topic to talk about sometimes. If you've been avoiding it, check us out because you'll have a little bit of fun. A lot, really.
A lot of fun.
Most fun you've ever had, probably anywhere in your life when it comes down to it.
Well, it is a ton of fun, and the hour goes by super, super fast. So, you got me hooked anyway.
Nice of you to say.
Well, thanks for being on the show. This has been great. A joy to have you guys. I've learned a ton, taken a bunch of notes, and I'm sure I'm going to get lots of great feedback.
Well, that's another lap around the bike park for Aging on Dirt. I hope you've learned something and or found this entertaining. Most importantly, go out and apply what you've learned so you can experience more joy on your bike. Remember, Joel wants your input. What topics and or guests do you want to hear? Reach out to him where you're listening to the podcast, on Facebook, or find his email/phone on his coaching website, jzmtb.com. Until next time, have fun and be safe out there.